Right to Work Foundation President Mark Mix says that Joe Biden is preparing to use executive action to push provisions in the PRO Act, now stalled in the Senate. Mix says the bill contains key policies big labor has been pushing for the past 80 years. One America's John Hines has more from Washington.
Mark Mix is president of the National Right to Work Foundation. What is your opinion of how the Biden administration is progressing? I understand that they want to implement through executive action some pro-union elements of the so-called PRO Act. Now, this PRO Act would protect union members' right to organize and some other things that the unions have been looking for years. Where does that stand now, sir?
This administration that claims to be and desires to be the most pro-union administration in American history, let me translate that for you. It's not pro-union, it's pro-union boss, and it's pro-forced unionism. This administration is trying to do, through executive action, what they probably can't get done through legislative action. The PRO Act, the so-called Protecting the Right to Organize bill, it's already passed the House of Representatives back in March of 2021. It passed with no hearings, no testimony, just brought right straight to the floor. And this is probably the most radical request by organized labor since the 1930s, when our federal labor policy was upheld by the United States Supreme Court, saying that union officials had the power to compel workers to associate with them, and that to insult to injury, force them to pay dues or fees in order to keep their jobs. This bill, the PRO Act, is a bill that union officials have thrown up against the wall to see if they can get basically everything they've asked for over the last 80 years in labor policy changes under this administration.
How would the PRO Act, this Labor Act, which was passed by the House, as you said, and is now pending in the Senate, how would this affect, for instance, gig workers like Uber drivers, things like that?
Yeah, that's a great point, and that's something that the union officials and Joe Biden want to change. Basically, under current law, Uber drivers, Lyft drivers, owner-operators in the trucking industry are considered independent contractors. They basically decide when they want to turn their machines on, when they want to turn them off, and they decide who they want to pick up and who they don't. Truck drivers decide which loads they want to take, but the unions can't stand that because we can't unionize independent contractors, but we can unionize employees. And so the PRO Act would start to work the way of redefining those workers that are heretofore called independent contractors, turn them into employees for purposes of unionization.
What about potentially unionizing members of a franchise like McDonald's? These are franchised. There is the company, but of course individuals own the franchise, which is a little bit different from Starbucks, which actually owns all the restaurants. They are also being increasingly unionized, which is interesting because it's a company which has some progressive tendencies at the top, and they've supported progressive causes, and yet they're being unionized in various individual stores. So what's going on there with say, franchisees potentially being unionized versus, say, Starbucks stores, Amazon outlets, things like that?
What union officials want to do is they want to have basically this joint employer definition that says that the mothership, the franchisor, is responsible for the actions of the franchisees when it comes to labor policy. And so what that allows union officials to do is use a tactic that they've used for years and years and years called the corporate campaign. And this is what is known as top-down organizing. You put pressure on the weakest point in a structure, and that point breaks, and then it provides a kind of a waterfall of actions down below. So they can attack the publicly traded McDonald's company, shame them for all kinds of injustices or alleged injustices they think that they're making, and all of a sudden, you know, the big bosses at McDonald's walk in and say, how do we solve this problem? And the union says it's really easy. Just unionize all of your franchisees and force these labor policies down their throats as part of your big structure. So when you allow them to put pressure on the mothership, on the franchisor, you're allowing them to put additional pressure on the franchisees and changing that model directly. Because if the company is now going to be responsible, if the mothership's going to be responsible for the actions of the franchisees, they're probably going to be more rigorous in demanding and pushing down these regulations through the franchise system. However, there is one thing that the people aren't reporting on. There's been a 42% increase in decertification elections, Jonathan, this year. That's when workers are trying to get out of a union, trying to get the union out of their workplace. So it's more likely today, there's a higher percentage of workers trying to get out of unions when you look at it per capita than those that are trying to get in. That narrative is not being reported anywhere except for here today on OAN.
Mark Mix, president of the National Right to Work Foundation and Committee, thank you for joining us on One American News, sir.
My pleasure, Jonathan. Thank you for paying attention to this important issue as we approach Labor Day and move beyond it.